Understood. Hao Guyu nodded, and a voice blared from the loudspeaker of the spider mecha. Sorry, everyone, I don't understand Siam, so we are still in a state of combat. The voice spread, and before the surrendering Siamese soldiers could react, a 12.7mm heavy machine gun swept over them, tearing their bodies apart. In places unseen on the battlefield, the souls of the dead soldiers left their bodies and were absorbed into the 10,000-soul banner, disguised as a national flag on the spider mecha, becoming the nourishing nourishment for the Een souls. After deciding to leave no survivors, the 1st Mecha Combat Brigade went berserk. All the armored vehicles and soldiers within sight became their targets. A massacre that literally turned the river red with blood. The Siamese soldiers also went insane. Seeing that no surrenders were accepted, they frantically started to flee away from the direction of the spider mechas. The infantry soldiers, desperate, began to seize any operational vehicle. When the infantry fighting vehicles became packed like sardine cans and no more could fit, they climbed onto the tops of armored vehicles and tanks. Those who came later tried to pull comrades off the vehicles to make room for themselves to climb on. Those on top, naturally unwilling, from grappling to shooting at each other, completely disregarding brotherhood. The internal breakdown of discipline within the Siamese army led them, when faced with desperate straits, to think not of a fight to the death but how to beg for their lives, even if it meant making a human shield of their comrades. The whole scene of the retreat was chaotic and disorganized, with still functional tanks and armored vehicles crammed with soldiers, people shoving each other, piling up, more exaggerated than Brother Asan's trains during ticketing rushes. Hao Guyu, charging at the forefront, aimed the 203mm main gun on his back at a tank 5 kilometers away that was making a run for it, a high-explosive bomb shot from the barrel, hitting near the tank. Though it didn't hit directly, the explosion from the massive 203mm bomb flipped the tank over on the spot. The soldiers clinging to the tank, each and every one of them, had their internal organs shattered by the shockwave. They lay around the tank like heavenly maidens scattering flowers, motionless. The spider mecha advanced, its 230mm guns targeting another M1A2 main battle tank 1.2 kilometers away. As the motors whirred, a burst of large-caliber machine gun fire swept across. The soldiers hanging on the tank didn't even have time to jump off before they served as reactive armor for this M1A2 main battle tank. Hit by the gunfire, their limbs flying in all directions, some cut in half at the waist, bloody organs hanging from the tank, altering the paintwork to blood red. This tank ultimately didn't escape either, as a string of 30mm cannon fire poured down into its hatch from a steep angle, first black smoke, then flames shot out, the internal ammunition exploded, the turret was blown high into the air, and thick smoke and flames roared up several meters high. Hao Guyu kept moving forward while firing, the spider mecha's reserve of tens of thousands of rounds ensuring his sustained firepower, like an ever-active fortress in battlefields. The path of the Siamese army he slaughtered was a sight of utter desolation and horror. That armored vehicle? Could it be a command vehicle? Are there officers inside? Suddenly, Hao Guyu spotted a fleeing armored vehicle at a distance with a slightly different appearance. Fleeing in itself was nothing special. The Siamese army was fleeing all over the battlefield. But this particular armored vehicle was surrounded by several tanks and armored vehicles, protecting it at the center. Discovering this pleasing surprise, Hao Guyu reported the situation to his brigade commander and decisively drove his mecha over. Monster! What kind of monster is this? Meanwhile, Bansong on the armored command vehicle that Hao Guyu had set his sights on watched the great rout of the battlefield, his eyes widening, muttering to himself incessantly. He had previously fantasized about annihilating the steel camp and securing a glorious reputation for himself. But just as they moved onto the plain, not having even seen the steel camp's forces yet, instead they encountered mechanized monsters several meters high, armed with 203mm cannons, their bodies bristling with firepower, resembling metallic, firepower-laden porcupines. Now, instead of fame, it was likely he would be nailed to the pillar of shame in Siamese history. Commanding 2 armored units that suffered heavy losses, including the Siamese Army's ace, the 1st Heavy Armored Division, such losses hadn't been seen since World War II, making this a mournfully pitiful war for Siam. Where's the backup from the rear? We need air support. Another side Dunamo screamed, watching his elite armored units smashed into scrap, his heart nearly bleeding. Before the battle, he could never have imagined the enemy would deploy previously unseen metallic spider monsters, and their armored torrent shattered upon contact. The staff officer's forehead sweated. He repeatedly said, "Sir, we've just received a report from the rear command. Several of our military airports have been premeditatedly attacked by steel camp soldiers, causing chaos at the airports. Only a few combat aircraft can provide air support. Other planes will struggle to arrive soon." Dunamo's forehead bulged with veins, angrily gritting his teeth. "The Air Force is useless. Tell the troops to retreat immediately." "We are already retreating." The staff officer gave a wry laugh, not continuing his sentence. Because at this moment across the plains battlefield, without their commanding, the 1st Heavy Armored Division and 2nd Cavalry Division were already crumbling, the hills filled with fleeing combat vehicles and soldiers. Dunamo's eyes were bloodshot. He bitterly exclaimed, "I hate it! Damn Jekka Group! This was a trap meant to lure our armored units here." Dunamo had finally figured it out. Steel Camp was deliberately used as bait by the enemy. But now it was too late for Dunamo to regret, as they, who had bitten the hook, were utterly unable to break free. "We can't fight this battle anymore. Have the cars speed up and call a helicopter to come over. I need to go back and report the situation to the king," he said. By this time, Bansong was already scared out of his wits. Hearing the sounds of combat draw nearer, he knew there was no hope of turning the tables. All he wanted to do now was escape with his life. However, Bansong's wish was not fulfilled. The helicopter coming to pick them up hadn't arrived yet, but the intense sound of explosions had already beaten it there. The several nearby armored vehicles and tanks, being covered by fire, saw the armored cars riddled with holes from machine gun fire and the tanks blown into parts by a 203mm shell. The armored command vehicle was also overturned, shaking up those inside with surging blood and chi, causing bone fractures in some and bleeding from ears and noses in others. Fortunately, the armored command vehicle's protection for its occupants was quite adequate, so no one died. When a dizzy Bansong, Dunamo, and several advanced staff officers crawled out of the armored vehicle and were about to run away, their movements suddenly halted, because a colossal object had already blocked their way. That was a spider mecha towering over a dozen meters high, its steel marred by twisted metal and dense pockmarks, its surface covered in battle scars from Gensmoke. The A-180 mecha ID painted on it was already blurred, but the cold and solemn aura of the war machine made the group of senior officers feel as though they were plummeting into an ice cave. "You'd better not move recklessly. If you don't wish to be prisoners, my bullets won't show mercy," he said. Hao Guyu's voice came from the mecha's loudspeakers, and as soon as his words ended, Dunamo drew his pistol and fired at the mecha. Bang, bang, bang. "You think you're worthy of my surrender? You scum of the Jekka Group, go to hell," he shouted. Dunamo was resolute. Born into a military family, he had the honor of commanding the ace of the Siamese army and was utterly loyal to Siam. His honor wouldn't allow him to be captured. The pistol bullets were deflected by the armor, and respecting the opponent's wishes, Hao Guyu controlled the spider mecha to smash down one of its metal legs, squashing Dunamo into a lump of unrecognizable flesh, his body torn asunder. "I imagine none of you wish to end up like him," he said. Hao Guyu's voice followed, and with a terrified look, Bansong immediately raised his hands and shouted loudly, "I surrender. I am willing to surrender." The other staff officers also surrendered one after another, and Hao Guyu showed a satisfied smile. These senior officers differ from ordinary soldiers. They are more valuable as prisoners. When the Siamese army's senior officers were all captured in a swoop, the leaderless Siamese army entered a countdown to annihilation, being encircled and annihilated one by the spider mechas. The battle ended at 3:25 p.m., and after all the pursuits and encirclements, the entire plain was dyed red with blood. Bodies of Siamese soldiers lay everywhere, along with destroyed armored vehicles. Tanks were scattered about the plains haphazardly, some still burning fiercely, turning this place into a vast graveyard of tanks. As of this day, December 28, 2025, the largest tank and armored battle since World War II has ended on the plains of Siam, with the Jekka Group emerging as the overwhelming victors. In this armored battle, the Jekka Group achieved a splendid victory, annihilating 2 armored divisions, destroying 413 tanks, 738 armored vehicles, 52 self-propelled guns and rocket artillery, and 1780 various types of truck vehicles, killing over 30,000 Siamese soldiers, with only a handful escaping successfully. Without delay, the 1st Mecha Combat Brigade quickly withdrew, for the roar of jets was already filling the sky. The Siam Air Force's hastily scrambled planes reached the battlefield. Their numbers were not many, but the guided bombs and air-to-ground missiles they dropped inflicted significant losses on the 1st Mecha Combat Brigade, with 7 or 8 Spider Mechas destroyed. The bombs and missiles carried by the Air Force were too powerful. Even if a Spider Mecha were hit only once, it was either fatally damaged or crippled. Fortunately, the number of jets was not large, and Chan Country's Air Force had also taken off across the border to intercept more and more Siamese jets. The Spider Mechas hastened their movements, evacuating their dead and wounded comrades from the destroyed mechas. They then blasted the downed Spider Mechas that could not be taken along with shells to further destroy them before retreating towards the mining area of their departure, where an underground tunnel leading to Chan Country allowed for their return. The Siam capital, Manchester, located in the command center of the Imperial Palace, where the atmosphere was oppressively tense. King Pooping's expression was as if he was ready to tear someone apart. His bloodshot eyes stared fixedly at the Chief of General Staff, Narong, who had come to report the situation. "What did you say? What do you mean the enemy deployed new large-scale mechas, causing the 1st Heavy Armored Division and the 2nd Cavalry Division to suffer heavy casualties and be forced to retreat? Division Commander Dunamo sacrificed himself? What the hell kind of battle is this?" Pooping's roar echoed through the command room, the officers sitting there silent as cicadas in winter, heads lowered, not daring to meet the king's furious gaze. "And what about Bansong? What is he good for? I entrusted my troops to his command, and this is the report he gives me." The more he thought about it, the angrier he became, and the angrier he became, the more he thought about it. Pooping's chest heaved violently, burning with rage. "Commander Bansong has been captured by the Jekka Group," Narong said after a few seconds of silence, stating the fact. Upon hearing this, Pooping's eyes twitched, veins on his forehead stood out, and he bellowed, "What did you say? That shameful wretch, he is Siam's army commander, Minister of Defense, and he dares to surrender to Jekka Group? He should go die in his duty like Dunamo. That would be the only way to honor our royal family's trust in him." Narong had no answer to give, only handing over a document, saying, "Your Majesty, this is the detailed battle report." When Pooping saw the content of the battle report, his blood rushed to his head, making him see stars and feel dizzy. The report revealed shocking numbers. The loss of 413 tanks, 738 armored vehicles, 52 self-propelled guns and rocket artillery, and a staggering 33,271 soldiers dead or missing. Barely 1,000 soldiers had returned. It could be said that these 2 divisions had been annihilated. Their designations might as well be stricken off the rolls. You've lost a whole armored torrent, so many armored combat vehicles? You played them away." His hand trembling slightly, Pooping's voice shook as he spoke. "The enemy's new mechas were too powerful, our armored torrent couldn't effectively counter them, and Steel Camp had deliberately harassed our rear airfields, making it difficult for fighter jets to take off for timely reinforcement, leading to the defeat," Narong explained, as the highest-ranking officer present. He had no choice but stand up and account for the battlefield circumstances to the outraged king. No matter how formidable the enemy's mechas were, they only amounted to a mere 130 or so, whereas our 2 armored divisions had 10 times the combat vehicles. We clearly had the advantage, and yet you present me with such a disastrous outcome? Are Jekka Group's new mechas that incredible? I don't believe it." As Pooping spoke, he pounded on the table, his palm turning red, oblivious to the pain. For the pain in his hand was nothing compared to the agony in his heart. The loss of the two armored divisions, especially the first heavy armored division, the crown jewel of Siam's army, not to mention their tremendous cost and the irreplaceable elite soldiers purchased at great expense, had been wiped out in one battle, a heartache beyond words. Your Majesty, the enemy's mechas are indeed that formidable, Narong said with a wry smile, addressing the incredulous king. It was you who said we could encircle Steel Camp. That's why I deployed the two armored divisions. Was that your judgment? To squander our nation's elite forces for nothing. As expected, upon hearing this, Puping's anger shifted onto Narong. I misjudged. I never expected the enemy to have those spider mechas, Narong admitted, acknowledging the powerful combat mechas deployed by the Jekka group which he had not anticipated. These mechas were not biological armors nor the Tiger main battle mechas seen during parades, but a completely new type, a land monstrosity with incredible defense and formidable firepower. In front of them, the steel torrent was ineffective as tanks were effortlessly destroyed, armored vehicles treated like toys, and infantry senselessly slaughtered, ultimately leading to Siam's most bitter defeat since its foundation. Puping, his mind clouded by fury, did not listen to Narong's explanation and immediately shouted, Now, as the King of Siam, I relieve you of your duty as Chief of General Staff. Go home, Narong. Wanyan Ting, you shall take over the position of Chief of General Staff. The high-ranking Siamese officers exchanged glances. Narong came from an established military family in Siam and was a top student at a military academy in Germany. After returning to Siam and joining the army, his prowess was recognized, and he quickly rose through the ranks with his strategic command in multiple military operations. Since becoming the Chief of General Staff, he had always been diligent, contributing significantly to the development of Siam's military capabilities, and was the right-hand man of the old king, Raja Jigenglong. Now, even he was dismissed, which surprised many senior officers. In their eyes, this defeat was a no-fault casualty. The enemy's deployment of new mechas was unforeseeable. Dismissing him for such a reason seemed too harsh, as Narong was one of the few knowledgeable military leaders within Siam. With Narong gone, who would take up the work? Who would stop those ferocious Jekka group soldiers? Siam only had this one officer capable of commanding major battles because the Siamese army suffered from rampant corruption and severe disciplinary issues, long-standing problems within its military forces. Not to mention, in Siam's armed forces, there were currently over 2,500 generals, a severe case of having too many chiefs and not enough Indians. Siam had always been under the control of the king, who could promote generals at will, elevate those he liked to higher ranks, and even appoint the royal dog as the Grand Marshal of the Air Force, though most ranks were just for show. However, the former old king Raja Jigenglong, although he liked to confer titles, had always trusted Narong's capabilities, relying on him to reorganize the national military. He knew who the real soldiers were and that he could not dismiss those who were genuinely effective, because without them, the military would be nothing but a crew of incompetents. Puping clearly didn't care about this, as he dismissed Narong with a wave of his hand. Narong's expression slightly froze, and he slowly closed his eyes. After a few seconds of silence, he took off his military cap, removed the insignia from his uniform, and saluted Puping. Narong respectfully obeys the king's decree. Having said that, he turned and left the command center, his figure looking especially forlorn and desolate. The other officers watched, filled with a sense of tragic foreboding. What are you looking at? Continue discussing how to deal with the Jekka group. Don't go back until we have a strategy. Puping snorted coldly, causing the officers to refocus their attention. The military meeting continued for over 5 hours, after which a staff officer burst in, reporting new developments to Puping. Your Majesty, the Chan Country Army is making large-scale movements at the border. 20,000 enemy troops are launching a major military campaign against our country in Baby Prefecture, De Prefecture, Fongsong Prefecture, and Chumphon Province. Our forward positions have been subjected to heavy artillery bombardments and aerial bombings. After the bombardment, the Chan Country soldiers dispatched tanks and infantry to attack, including a large number of super soldiers as the Sharp Knife Company, and also deployed Spider Mecha into battle. Our soldiers, having survived the bombardment, are unable to hold back the advance of the Chan country army. As of now, they have breached our first line of defense at the border and have advanced an average of 20 kilometers into our territory. Our forces are now holding the second and third lines of defense, with multiple frontline units requesting reinforcements. What? Pooping's face turned pale with fear, trying to stand up but accidentally hitting the chair. He clumsily fell to the floor but didn't bother to stand up, frantically looking up and shouting, "Hurry! Ask for help from beautiful country. Siam is at a critical juncture of life and death. We need their assistance." Shocking! Jekka Group deploys a mysterious new large human-shaped mecha into battle, which looks strikingly like a giant spider, a never-before-seen creation in mecha design. The first large human-shaped mecha used in actual combat, Jekka Group is leading the global mecha industry by 20 years. Siam suffers the greatest defeat in its history, with 1,200 combat vehicles destroyed and over 30,000 soldiers killed. The combat strength of mechas is unmatched worldwide, heralding the dawn of the mecha era. A renowned military analyst from the Great British Empire declared that with the appearance of the Spider main battle mecha, overnight, every tank in the world, whether operational or under development, has become obsolete and belonged to the dustbin of history. The next day, news of this great battle surged to the top of global trends, dominating news rankings in countries worldwide and sparking intense global discussion. Several videos released by Jekka Group themselves were shared tens of millions of times in just one day. In the video, the scene captured by Jekka Group's first mecha combat brigade on the Siamese plain depicted the Spider main battle mecha in action, fully engaged in combat, destroying all types of armored vehicles in its path. Tanks were shattered by its 203mm main cannon, armored vehicles were pierced into honeycombs by machine gun fire, and soldiers were overwhelmed by dense 12.7mm gunfire, littering the ground with corpses. The combat videos were filmed very clearly, and the cruel and violent scenes allowed viewers to fully appreciate the strength of the Spider mecha. The cold body could withstand multiple cannon strikes, fierce firepower blasted in all directions from the mech, and its 8 long legs agilely dashed and dodged, capable of arming against airborne helicopters and destroying armored vehicles. Squashing infantry was as simple as stepping on ants. Every viewer who saw the video gaped in astonishment, stunned by the grand armored conflict and the terrifying capabilities of the Spider mecha. As expected, the sudden emergence of the Spider mecha ignited global curiosity instantly, leading to a surge in related discussions on social platforms such as Twitter, Douyin, Bihoo, and Facebook. God, Jekka Group actually has this kind of real battle large mecha. I thought they were just bluffing before. A 203mm cannon as the main weapon of the mecha. How dare Jekka Group? Isn't this bullying? They even brought naval artillery on land to bully the army. Can they consider the feelings of the infantry being bombarded? One 203mm main gun, 230mm machine guns, for 20mm machine guns, 8 12.7mm heavy machine guns. This firepower configuration, coupled with such strong defensive capabilities, is simply an armored bunker. I'm really curious how Jekka Group managed it, enabling such a huge thing to move. According to the latest battle report, Jekka Group only lost 18 large spider mechas, but they wiped out 2 armored divisions and 1,200 combat vehicles. The combat power is absurdly off the charts. Human armored vehicles are too outdated now, including the seemingly advanced Beautiful Country M1A2 main battle tank, which was also easily destroyed by Jekka Group's Spider mecha on the Siamese plain. In future ground battles, large main battle mechas will become the new kings of land warfare. Tanks are outdated. Incredible mecha, Great Jekka Group, the light of humanity, Sujie, has ushered in the human mecha era. As the second largest superpower in the world, we India must also possess large mechas to maintain world peace and order. This mecha is so cool. I really want to buy one to play with. How much would Jekka Group sell one for? Real-life movies have entered reality. I never thought I would see a mecha in my lifetime, but Jekka Group has really got this thing figured out from movies. I suspect they have alien technology. The discussion online exploded, and after seeing the mechas appear, many people were ecstatic, raising posters for movies and games like Transformers, Pacific Rim, and StarCraft, hoping their own countries would quickly follow in mecha development. Many others began further denouncing Jekka Group's malpractices, accusing them of assassinating the Siam king and brazenly invading Siam, akin to a resurgence of modern Nazism. Of course, more people were still amazed by the spider mecha created by Jekka Group. Although it's not the most hoped-for human-shaped mecha, its rugged and ferocious appearance, powerful combat capabilities, and fierce firepower still captured a large fan base. Not just the casual onlookers, military experts from various countries were more surprised that large mechas were actually built and used in real combat. Even though Jekka Group possessed biological armored mechas, many military experts believed that once mechas were enlarged, they would become easy targets with no practical combat utility. Even Jekka Group's previously debuted Tiger main battle mecha was belittled by many experts from various countries as being utterly useless. Now, with the spider mecha's debut, countless military experts had their faces figuratively swollen. In front of the spider mecha's astonishing track record, pulling off an exchange ratio of 1 to several dozens against an armored torrent, anyone who dares to spout nonsense saying large mechas are useless must be drowned in the spit of the populace. As a result, global military budgets surged, and an arms race for mechas kicked off by Jekka rapidly swept across the world, with hundreds of billions of US dollars continually invested into the research field. Including the 5 permanent members, they stepped up funding for mecha research, hoping to quickly keep pace with this global military transformation and join the Mecha Club. Various military forces actively responded to mecha development, enthusiastically pursuing their own country's mecha projects, inadvertently forming a mecha race. Terrifying. In Siamese City, inside a military weapon research bureau, Boston Dynamics Company President Kedgelo Clayton looked at a pile of spider mecha parts and fragments, his eyes sparkling brightly. These mecha fragments had all been collected from the battlefield because they had been deliberately destroyed when being withdrawn. The mecha had been utterly devastated. Nonetheless, Siamese troops had treasured them like precious gems and had gone to great lengths to retrieve them. However, Siam had not had the chance to start researching them before Beautiful Country stepped in and took over the research rights to this batch of mecha spoils. Kedgelo had come for this very purpose. The daring mecha and diamond mecha developed by his Boston Dynamics company had been recently rejected by the military of Beautiful Country due to failed research, which prevented them from receiving purchase orders from the military. Now, having heard that Siam had spoils from Jekka Group's mecha, he lost no time. Through lobbying high-level officials in Beautiful Country, he had obtained the opportunity to come here for research. After actually seeing these pieces of spider mecha, Kedgelo's worldview was shattered to pieces. For example, what he was testing right now was a wriggling meat tumor. In his tests, this meat tumor exhibited an extremely high resistance to heat. Under the blaze of a flame, the surface of the meat tumor slowly started to char. But the rate of charring was very slow, completely unlike the resistance that flesh should have. In Kedgelo's understanding, the flesh of normal carbon-based life forms, which use water as a medium, could definitely not do this, because both high and low temperatures can cause biological cells to collapse. Yet these meat tumors possessed heat-resistant characteristics. Although they appeared to be flesh, the abilities they possessed amazed Kedgelo. Beyond heat resistance, these meat tumors were like a special type of super rubber, with incredible toughness and elasticity. In research tests, a meat tumor with the thickness of a palm could easily withstand the firing of 7.62 bullets from 50 meters away. After a bullet entered the meat tumor, it would stretch the tumor continuously, like a piece of rubber, countering the bullet's kinetic energy and then ejecting the depleted bullet. Any kinetic energy that exceeded the meat tumor's limits, although it would penetrate the meat tumor, would not cause much deformation in the meat tumor itself, which also had the ability to self-repair. The wriggling meat tumor secreted a type of mycelium that grew new meat tumors until the wound was covered. This repair could continue 2 to 3 times depending on the size of the wound, explaining why spider mecha on the battlefield, despite looking covered in external scars, could still move normally. Because only the external supplementary armor was damaged, the meat tumors inside had repaired themselves. The astounding speed and flexibility of the spider main battle mecha could also be attributed to these meat tumors. This kind of elasticity, how on earth is it achieved? It's simply not something that seems as if it could be produced by nature. Kegelo looked at a meat tumor as thick as a finger that had hoisted a 1-ton weight and was still continuously extending and contracting, causing the ton of metal below to swing up and down like a yo-yo, making his pupils quake. Turning his head, Kegelo saw a severed metallic leg of a spider mecha nearby. After cutting open the metal exterior, the inside was filled with twisting meat tumors, like countless muscle fibers wound around. Kegelo could already imagine a completely intact spider battle armor walking. Rather than saying they were walking, it is more accurate to say they were bounding. Only meat tumors with this level of elasticity could support a spider mecha's combat weight of hundreds of tons on 8 long legs, instantly rebounding upon landing, coupled with the special construction at the ends of the spider's legs, enabling them to maintain surprising speed and flexibility despite the massive weight. How about it? Can you replicate this kind of mecha? At the side, a Chan Country Affairs intelligence officer from the Central Intelligence Agency named Shang asked. They had taken these pieces of mecha from the Siam military and guarded them as treasures. I need time to study the secrets of these mecha. If this kind of meat tumor can be replicated and produced, the outcome would be enormous in both military and civilian fields, Kegelo replied, brimming with excitement. There were many more secrets to uncover about the spider mecha, such as the neural connections achieving one-person operation, as well as the construction of the mecha, the framework material, energy transmission operation, and so on, all issues he wanted to figure out. Of course, the most crucial was this special kind of meat tumor. Kegelo was thrilled at the prospect that should he manage to develop a similar product, his fortune would be assured. Just as Kegelo was lost in his daydreams, the exclamations of several researchers suddenly snapped him back to reality. What happened? Mr. Kegelo, these meat tumors suddenly began to shrink. The researchers reported the situation frantically. Hearing that the precious material had developed a problem, Kegelo became anxious and hurried over. He saw that in the place where the meat tumors were stored, the ones that were previously wriggling no longer moved and instead began decaying and withering bit by bit, emitting a strong stench as if they were ordinary decaying flesh. Damn! What are you standing there for? Freeze these treasures immediately, Kegelo, sweating from his forehead, ordered the nearby researchers. But no matter what methods they used, they could not stop the decay of the meat tumors. Eventually, tons of meat tumors turned into mounds of rotten and stinking decay, completely devoid of their previous miraculous properties. Kegelo clutched his head in agony, continuously screaming damn, as he could only watch helplessly as the meat tumor rotted and deteriorated. His gaze filled with despair. Having witnessed this, Shuang's mouth twitched, and he immediately went out to report the matter to CIA Director Judith. Through a video call, Shuang successfully met with Judith and recounted the situation that had just occurred. It's probably a security measure of the Jekka Group. They want to use it to restrict our entry into the mecha field. Such a despicable tactic. Judith snorted coldly, seemingly forgetting that their own beautiful country had established technical blockades and sanctions, like building high walls in the chip field to block other countries from catching up. In this respect, the beautiful country was a pioneer. But it's no use. Our beautiful country has the strongest scientific research team and spirit on Blue Star. Sooner or later, the secret of this mecha meat tumor will be deciphered by us. I'll suggest to His Excellency the President that we continue to increase the funding for mecha research. We can't fall too far behind the Jekka Group in the field of mechas. As Judith said this, he did not know that the cultivation of the meat tumor had involved spirit stones. A fully developed meat tumor, without the continued absorption of spiritual liquid, would become inactive no matter what method was used. And spiritual liquid could only be made by crushing spirit stones and mixing them with water, something that Blue Star did not possess. Also, agree to Puping's request. But right now his neighbors, Anan, Lansong, and Jinla, are still hesitating. You need to do more in the region, create more issues, to further increase their fear of the Jekka Group and help them make a firm decision. Judith continued to speak. Puping was their beautiful country's puppet, specifically supported to oppose the Jekka Group. Now that Puping had asked for help, beautiful country naturally did not want its puppet defeated so easily. After the Jekka group launched a powerful offensive, several meetings were held within the country. They officially agreed to Puping's request for help and lobbied other countries to join in the encirclement and suppression of the Jekka group. Understood. I will handle it well. A sharp light flashed in Shuang's eyes, aware of what to do next after the assassination operation against the Siam king. Such operations were a specialty of the CIA, and he was very confident he could manage it. Meanwhile, outside the Military Ordnance Bureau, a genetic warrior from the Jekka Group's intelligence department was also taking off his headset, reporting the situation here to his superiors. When the time came to December 30th, 2025, the Jekka Group launched a comprehensive offensive against Siam. Artillery fire along the border was relentless throughout the night, as jets frequently took off to carry out aerial bombings over Siam. Meanwhile, several of the Jekka Group's armored synthetic brigades, accompanied by a large number of fully armed soldiers, marched across the border between Chan country and Siam, advancing into Siam territory. In anticipation of the Jekka Group's threat, Siam had been building defenses at key strategic locations for half a year. There were a total of 5 defense lines, and facing the Jekka Group's assault, it only took half a day for the Jekka Group to break through the first and second defense lines, with some cities near the border being occupied. The most critical position was located at the Chumphon Province defenses. On the map, Siam resembled an X, with Chumphon Province at the intersection of the axe head and handle. Once Chumphon Province was captured, the long stretch of territory at the axe handle, comprising more than a dozen provinces, would be completely cut in two, becoming a swath of land beyond the control of the Siam government. If this happened, those territories would likely be annexed by the Jekka Group, resulting in the loss of more than 1/5 of the country's territory and coastline. Even worse, if the Jekka Group continued its momentum and captured other coastal areas, it was highly possible that Siam would become a landlocked country, which was something utterly unacceptable to Siam. For this reason, Siam constructed a massive defense line in Chumphon Province, where over 250,000 soldiers were assembled. Meanwhile, the Siam king Puping, jumping high and low, was tearfully denouncing the Jekka Group's atrocities in front of the United Nations Security Council, actively contacting neighboring countries, using the Jekka Group's brutality as evidence, to have them send troops to help defend against the Jekka Group's invasion. While those countries were still somewhat hesitant, during Puping's international visits, a series of attacks targeting their high-ranking officials erupted in these countries, with the assailants identified as super soldiers. Although there were not many casualties due to enhanced security measures, these acts undoubtedly enraged the countries. They believed the Jekka Group was using this method to warn them not to join the war or assist the Siam government. Yet, such actions only reinforced King Puping's argument of the Jekka Group's threat. Help Siam today, or there will be no one to help when it was their turn tomorrow. Thus, under the mediation of the beautiful country and Siam's financial campaign, Annan, Lansong, and Jinla successively passed resolutions, declaring intervention in the Chan-Siam War, committing troops to join in the crusade against the Jekka Group, and supporting Siam against the Jekka Group's aggressive military actions. On January 1st, Jinla entered the war, with its president Jose Gon E. Alder solemnly declaring, "The Jekka Group's military aggressions in the Southeast Asia region contravene international principles of peace. Despite our strong opposition, the Jekka Group has launched large-scale ground operations against Siam and unilaterally invaded Siam's territory. We hereby officially announce that we are dispatching several military units into Siam, taking military intervention to support the Siam War and to uphold the territorial integrity of Siam." On January 2nd, Lansong country announced its entry into the fray. Prime Minister Hong Maki condemned the Jekka Group. "The geopolitical security of Southeast Asia is closely related to our country's interests. The escalation of tensions is not in Lansong's interest, nor is it in the interest of the region or the world. The Jekka Group's crimes in Siam will not cease, and they are unwilling to reach a truly substantive peace agreement. After several unsuccessful negotiations, we in Lansong officially announced today that we are sending troops to help Siam resist the Jekka Group's barbaric military invasion. As long as the Jekka Group does not stop its military actions in Siam, we will not withdraw our forces. On January 3rd, the Prime Minister of Henan country, Du Zhongchuan, issued a tough statement. Recently, we have heard threats from the Jekka Group. We tell them we will not ignore any threats. The Jekka Group's attempt to use espionage and terrorist actions to force us to back down has underestimated our resolve. In the recent war conflicts, we in Henan respect the territorial integrity of Siam. Any strike by the Jekka Group against Siam will receive a severe response from Henan country. It's not enough to just protect Siam. That would not be victory, for victory means defeating the adversary. What we need to do is to advance into Chan country territory and completely destroy the Jekka Group, this cancer plaguing Southeast Asia, to liquidate the high-ranking members of the Jekka Group, and to restore true peace and freedom to the Southeast Asian region. I also call again, at this critical juncture, to prevent the spread of the Jekka Group's neo-Nazi ideology. All Southeast Asian countries should stand together with the people of Siam. Victory will surely be ours. Amidst the stern declarations from these three countries, a total of 450,000 troops from the trio entered within Siam. Among these three countries, Jinla country sent 20,000 troops, and Lansong country sent 30,000. As neither of these two countries has a strong population or military might, the former being the poorest in Southeast Asia and the only landlocked country, with a population of over 7 million and less than 100,000 troops, even poorer than Chan country, which has seen frequent internal conflicts. The latter isn't much better off, with a population of 17 million and a combined army, navy, and air force of just over 100,000, of which the Air Force and Navy amount to a mere 10,000. That these two countries could send so many troops was already quite a gesture. If it were not for the threat posed by the Jekka Group and Siam's willingness to foot the bill for military expenses and other benefits, they would have been reluctant to come. However, to counter the threat of the Jekka Group, they still further mobilized their militias, opened up more recruitment for soldiers, and eked out more war potential. Mainly because Siam, the wealthy big brother, was willing to spend liberally, they were content to follow behind and cheer, swelling the ranks and giving face to their generous brother. So, Jinla and Lansong mainly boosted the numbers, but it was Henan country that was the main force in sending troops. Henan country had a population of 100 million, a domestic GDP of over $300 billion, and past military success striking down the Blue Star dominator, the beautiful country. Its military ethic was considered the strongest among Southeast Asian countries, with regular forces, provincial armies, and self-defense teams adding up to over 2 million, plus another 4 million in reserves, a total mobilization nation. Because of this, Henan country mobilized 400,000 troops this time, with the vast amounts of funding provided by Siam and certain concessions of interests promised by Siam, they had no reservations. They also wanted to prove who was the real leader in Southeast Asia. Faced with the entry of Henan, Lansong, and Jinla into the war, with a stance firmly supporting Siam, the Jekka Group only gave a bland response. Liu Yingying casually mentioned in a televised speech, "Any participating country that opposes the Jekka Group is on the Jekka Group's list for a counterstrike, and they will bear the consequences." The meaning of those words was simple. If you dare send troops to join the war, wait and see if we don't take you down. For those countries that haven't experienced the iron fist of the Jekka Group, a lesson was in order, not to mention it was a good opportunity to show them who was the real big brother in Southeast Asia. January 18th. After a half-month hiatus, the Jekka Group was on the move again, adjusting their forces and preparing to launch a new massive ground offensive. The ceasefire primarily allowed the armies of the Henan three countries to move deeper into Siam, as scaring them off from sending reinforcements would have been problematic. However, before the large-scale ground offensive could begin, Jekka Group's fighters took off first. Chan country's Kachwan Airport, the largest military airport in Chan country, housed over 80 fighters. Aside from some old third-generation fighters originally owned by the Chan country government, there were also dozens of half-third and fourth-generation fighters purchased from Russia and Hua country. At the airport, Su Jie stood in front of a Russian combat fighter that had been drastically modified. The radar inside the aircraft was replaced with a biological radar, and its exterior covered with a thin layer of meat film and wings adorned with glowing feather patterns, making it look bizarre. This was naturally Su Jie's masterpiece because the research on air dominance puppets at Puppet Hall had not yet yielded results. The research on air combat puppets was more difficult than ground vehicles, and now with Spider Mecha being deployed, the project Su Jie had assigned to Puppet Hall for developing air dominance puppets hadn't made much progress. Having no choice, Su Jie took matters into his own hands, employing the Insect Transformation Manual and the help of engineers to magically modify modern fighters. The advantage was that the strength of the modified fighters increased, but the drawback was that their lifespan severely decreased. They were easily scrapped after a few missions. This mainly was because the fighters were too precise and Su Jie's enchanting and modifications were simply too blunt. The delicate internal instruments and components could not withstand it, much like equipping a motorcycle with a fighter jet's engine, which would cause the fighter to disintegrate after a few sorties, a particularly painful waste. This type of modification was too costly, as the fighters were expensive to purchase and costly to modify, all requiring mid-grade spirit stones. Regular spirit stones wouldn't suffice, and the crafts would be scrapped after just a few uses, which was cause for heartache. Thus, these magically modified fighters were internally referred to as spiritual vulture fighters by the Jekka group, and because they had just been successfully modified recently, there weren't many of them yet. The reason for halting ground operations was to wait for these modified fighters, as they needed to establish some degree of air superiority before launching a core-level ground campaign recklessly, which could easily lead to being bombed by the enemy air force. Commander, the first flying squadron is ready and can take off for combat at any time. A Chan Country Air Force general reported to Su Jie with utmost respect. Deploy them, we need to achieve some degree of air dominance. Su Jie, with his piercing gaze, issued the combat order. Soon, 24 magically modified spiritual vulture fighters took to the skies, along with several other fighters that had not been modified. Not only from this airport, but many military airports within Chan Country also had regular fighters taking off, most flying toward Siam, and a small number toward Henan, Jinla, and Lansong, as a welcoming present for their participation in the war. During the time Su Jie had halted operations, he increased the number of modified spiritual vulture fighters, now having an entire squadron of 24 units. Because the spiritual vulture fighters were expensive, not just in terms of real money but importantly requiring many spirit stones for magical modification, with each operation reducing their durability by 1 point, and a total durability of only 3 to 4 points. Not even a mining family could sustain such production. With such an appalling rate of scrapping, the cost-effectiveness just wasn't there. Aside from air combat and strikes on high-value targets, regular air raids weren't practical, only usable in key battles. As fighter jets from Chan Country took off in such large numbers, this extensive Air Force activity naturally couldn't escape the monitoring of ground radar stations. Moreover, with Siam and Chan Country being so close, as soon as Chan Country's fighters mobilized, Siam received the news and urgently deployed their fighters for intercept combat. Chan Country's ground radar stations also captured signals of Siam's approaching fighters, with both sides pretty much laying their cards on the table. High above at 10,000 meters, a shadow burst out from beneath the sea of clouds, piercing through with great speed. Wu Boyan, wearing his combat mecha suit, piloted one of the magically modified spiritual vulture fighters. Indeed, he was also a genetic warrior specifically enhanced for sensory perception, which allowed him to better utilize the biological radar for tracking enemies. Today, many parts of the fighter's cockpit were covered with mycelium and meat tumors, with veins connecting into the mecha suit, linking Wu Boyan to the fighter for a more efficient combat experience. This system, initially used for driving the Spider main battle mecha, was transplanted into the spiritual vulture fighter. This type of fighter could only be used by the Jekka group themselves, for even the manufacturers of the fighters would find it hard to maintain and service them, leaving only Jekka group capable of handling it. Alert! Alert! Fighter signal detected. Fighter signal detected. Signal coordinates located at. Suddenly, the cockpit's display registered activity. Wu Boyan narrowed his eyes, the veins at the corners throbbing as he ran the biological radar at full power. Employing sonar, electromagnetic pulses, and infrared radiation, the biological radar held significant advantages in reconnaissance, detecting Siam's enemy aircraft beyond visual range first. In Wu Boyan's perception, the enemy aircraft showed no signs of course alteration yet, evidently still unaware of his presence. In modern air combat, the two most crucial factors are radar and stealth. Because in aerial combat, detection and destruction rely on who spots the enemy first or reduces their own chance of being detected, that is the key to victory. The spiritual vulture fighter, in addition to its powerful biological radar for enemy searching, is also wrapped in a flesh membrane that effectively eliminates radar scanning. Its radar reflective surface is incredibly small, reaching a world-class standard. Sending you on your way. Wu Boyan had no hesitation. He decisively controlled the missile launch through his nerves. The belly of the aircraft opened, and an active radar-guided medium-range air-to-air missile fell away. It was only after it detached from the aircraft that a cold launch successfully ignited. The missile's engine operated, swiftly flying forward. After launching the missile, Wu Boyan did not turn back, but continued to use biological radar to continuously track and lock onto the target, guiding the launched missile. Only when the launched air-to-air missile entered the range of the active homing head did Wu Boyan release the radar illumination. It was not until then that the enemy aircraft detected the incoming air-to-air missile, performing drastic maneuvers and releasing decoy flares. However, the opponent ultimately did not escape the lock of the air-to-air missile. The missile, which accelerated to several times the speed of sound, was significantly faster than the jet. Once its decoy flares failed to fool the air-to-air missile, the survival probability greatly decreased. Boom! A Siamese JS-39C/D Gripen fighter disintegrated in mid-air, turning into a ball of fire in the sky. The pilot had just ejected seconds before and was hit by flying shrapnel. By the time the parachute landed back on the ground, it only brought back the upper half of the pilot's body. The lower half had vanished, with no clue where it had gone. Perfect. A smile appeared on Wu Boyan's face. One missile had destroyed the enemy jet worth tens of millions of US dollars, starting off his day of combat on a good note. Steering the aircraft through a turn, he was now over Siamese airspace. Looking down from a high altitude, there was a Siamese city below. Wu Boyan lowered his flight altitude and flew across the city overhead, causing the crowd of Siamese people below to scream and run around in panic and disarray, acting very arrogantly. This move naturally attracted the attention of the enemy, and soon other hostile jets were pursuing him, which was also Wu Boyan's intention. The spiritual vulture fighters are outstanding in combat. To not waste the opportunity and have their jets scrapped for no reason, they need to act as decoys, drawing in enemy jets to destroy them. Another jet. I wonder what model it is. Wu Boyan, using the biological radar, once again detected an enemy jet appearing out of visual range, and shortly after pressing the missile launch, he abruptly heard a series of urgent alarms sounding. Alert! Incoming missile from 11 o'clock direction. Please evade. Please evade. The console's display emitted frantic alarm sounds. Wu Boyan, with a serious expression, deployed decoy flares while the aircraft began large-scale maneuvers, opening the jet's afterburner, boosting the speed to beyond Mach 2. The so-called afterburner refers to jet aircraft using an afterburner chamber, sacrificing fuel consumption for speed, allowing the aircraft to gain substantial thrust for a brief period. When Wu Boyan activated the spiritual vulture fighter's thrust, the enchantment array pattern located at the engine erupted with powerful kinetic energy. Amidst the trembling of the engine as if it was about to explode, it provided robust and surging power to the spiritual vulture fighter. Wu Boyan caught a glimpse of the incoming missile from the corner of his eye as he continued to flee at high speed in his aircraft. Typically, the flying state of air-to-air missiles is divided into two parts. One is powered flight, and the other is unpowered glide. The first half relies on engine thrust, while the second half relies on missile inertia to fly and gradually slows down. Missiles are most threatening in the first half because, during this period, missiles fly at maximum speed, potentially reaching several times the speed of sound, whereas inertia flight will slow down, reducing the threat to the aircraft. The speed burst by opening the spiritual vulture fighter's afterburner was crucial. Wu Boyan gained 2 to 3 seconds for himself. Air-to-air missile propulsion fuel typically only lasts about 10 seconds before entering inertial deceleration flight, during which the missile hit rate drops sharply. With the acceleration, Wu Boyan piloted the spiritual vulture fighter, evading the air-to-air missile's fastest propulsion acceleration, allowing its fuel to deplete and its speed to decrease. With Wu Boyan's maneuvers, he narrowly avoided the incoming missile. That was close. Nearly lost my life. Wu Boyan's heart pounded as he watched the missile he had launched fail to hit the target. The enemy aircraft, by opening its afterburner, caused the air-to-air missile he had launched to exceed the maximum thrust phase. Subsequently, the enemy aircraft executed a high-angle sideslip, shedding the fuelless missile. As the two fighter jets approached each other, having both opened their afterburners, the short distance of a few dozen kilometers flashed by, and they were already within visual range of each other. Turns out it's the beautiful country's F-35 that was sold to Siam. No wonder it's so fast. Wu Boyan, with the eyesight of a genetic warrior, clearly saw the other jet, which was the beautiful country's F-35 stealth fighter. Siam had initially purchased 20 F-35 fighters from the beautiful country, each costing upwards of $100 million, treasures of the Siamese Air Force. Wang Defa, what the hell is that? In the cockpit of the F-35 stealth fighter, a black pilot was at the controls. He was the beautiful country's designated pilot, Somjet Thorn, who, upon seeing the spiritual vulture fighter, widened his eyes in shock as if he had seen a ghost. He was hired by the beautiful country as a mercenary and joined the Siam Air Force to help in combat. This was also his first time taking to the skies within Siam, and the sight of the spiritual vulture fighter, a half-mechanized, half-flesh aircraft, rendered him utterly speechless. The fuselage was not made of steel but was covered in a layer of flesh. The nose and wings had bone and feather-like structures, resembling a monstrous bird with its mouth open, revealing sharp teeth. Wu Boyan didn't care what the opponent thought. He decisively maneuvered the spiritual vulture fighter to meet him. The distance between them was too short for missiles to ignite and accelerate, and they had already entered hand-to-hand combat range, where the only reliable weapon was the machine gun. At this moment, it was all about who could perform better somersaults and sharp turns. It's rare for a dogfight to occur in modern air combat. Evidently, Wu Boyan faced this rare situation today, but he was not afraid. Instead, he was full of confidence. Shitty as hell, truly an ugly plane. Watch me beat you down. Somjet, cursing, pulled the joystick, aiming his fighter's nose at Wu Boyan, firing 25mm machine gun rounds mixed with tracers that illuminated the trajectory. Wu Boyan smirked coldly, and without moving a muscle, controlled the plane through his neurological connection, turning and climbing. His fighter soared straight up, making the incoming machine gun fire miss entirely. Somjet's face changed, sensing trouble, and tried to maneuver sharply, but it was already too late. As Wu Boyan climbed, his fighter flipped over for inverted flight, meaning the cockpit faced the ground while the belly faced the sky. Normally, pilots at this moment would experience inverse G-force, causing the blood to abruptly surge to their head, increasing intracranial pressure, resulting in immense pain. If not managed well, the fighter could stall and crash. This was a tricky task and a game for the brave, usually performed only by elite pilots during aerial stunt shows. However, Wu Boyan was a genetic warrior, and the pressure from the inverted flight didn't bother him at all. During the inverted flight, he pushed down the nose and rolled the airframe, locking onto the F-35 fighter, making a steep turn. Bye-bye, little chick. Return to the embrace of Mother Earth. With a slight smirk, Wu Boyan's senses and neurological reactions dominated in close-range combat. He locked his fighter's nose onto the F-35, continuously fine-tuning to maintain balance, and calmly fired his machine gun. The machine gun rounds drew a descending arc in the sky. Wu Boyan even calculated the trajectory of the falling bullets. The large machine gun rounds pierced big holes in the F-35, tearing through the aircraft's body and wrecking the intricate electronics and engine inside. In an instant, thick black smoke billowed from the fuselage, and the tail ignited in flames. Somjet, hit by the strafing, had his head blown apart by the machine gun, with no chance to eject. In the end, the stealth fighter, worth hundreds of millions of US dollars, plummeted straight down, crashing near a village. The fuel and missiles inside the aircraft exploded, creating a massive fireball that terrified the villagers. That's the second one. The standard for an ace pilot is shooting down 5 fighters. I wonder if I'll have a chance to reach it. Wu Boyan excitedly whistled, thrilled with his combat achievement. Eager to continue, he flew the fighter, searching for the next daring enemy aircraft, viewing them as his stepping stones to becoming an ace pilot. On January 18th, the battle wasn't confined to Siam. After the spiritual vulture fighters took control of the situation, a portion of them continued to engage in combat in the skies above Siam. Another set of spiritual vulture fighters, along with other fighters that had not been modified yet, began targeted air raids on important military targets of the enemy countries. Jinla Country Hui Ping Airport. This was the largest airport in Jinla Country. Due to the weak military forces of Jinla Country, with an air force of only 2,000 personnel and no active-duty formal fighters, they had only 4 Yak-130 trainers that served as light fighters and about 30 helicopters, making it one of the weakest air forces in Southeast Asia. When the time reached the early hours of the morning, 3 Jekka Group fighters streaked through the sky. The leading aircraft dropped a guided bomb first, destroying the airport's only close-range air defense missile system. Enemy attack! At the airport control tower, the Jinla Country Air Force soldiers, who had been somewhat dozing off, were jolted awake by the explosion. As they yelled and shouted, they hurriedly ran outside. Facing the air raid from Jekka Group, the entire airport plunged into chaos. In the sky, a spiritual vulture fighter accompanied by 2 Su-30 fighters, with 1 lead and 2 wingmen, were delivering a devastating blow to the airport. Air-to-ground missiles and guided bombs fell one after another, turning the helicopters on the apron and in the hangars into twisted metal wreckage. The 4 Yak-130 trainers didn't even have a chance to take off before they were blown to pieces by missiles. After dropping the bombs, the 3 fighters began a nosedive and directly used their machine guns to strafe the ground. The airport's only high-altitude artillery troops had collapsed, and now no one could stop Jekka Group's fighters from wreaking havoc, as their large machine gun bullets pierced through the stationary helicopters. When the 3 Jekka fighters exhausted all their ammunition and left contentedly, all they left behind were the raging fires and the remnants of destroyed helicopters scattered across the airport, with casualties strewn about and the sounds of the wounded groaning in pain, sending chills down the spine of anyone listening. Jekka Group's retaliation came swiftly, as Jinla Country paid the price for their involvement in aiding Siam, with their domestic air force wiped out by the Jekka Group. A similar scene unfolded in Lansong Country, resembling Jinla Country. With an air force of 1,500 personnel and only a few trainers that could serve as light fighters, Lansong Country's main air force consisted of several dozen outdated helicopters. Facing the air raids from the Jekka Group, a squadron of fighters completed a surprise sweep against the air forces of Lansong Country, effortlessly annihilating their so-called air force, turning their airports into ruins, and their national airspace into Jekka Group's own backyard, with Jekka Group's fighters coming and going as they pleased. The plight of these 2 impoverished countries shocked the international community. The 2 beleaguered countries began to lament at the United Nations Security Council about the oppressive air raids from the Jekka Group that directly resulted in the collapse of their air forces. Whether they regretted their actions was unknown, but certainly, after the air raids, many voices of dissent emerged among their national elites who had initially unanimously supported the dispatch of troops to help Siam and were now frightened by Jekka Group's air raids. In civil circles within both countries, there was a mixture of curses and fears. Some were angry about Jekka Group's air raid operations, while others were simply terrified, as they hadn't even seen Jekka Group's ground troops before their air forces were completely eliminated. They feared that Jekka Group would bomb cities and other densely populated areas. With their air forces gone, how would they stop them? January 19th, in Henan Country, Laizhou Province. An Henan military camp was stationed here. Henan divided its country into 7 military districts and 1 special garrison district. This military camp belonged to the 338th Infantry Division of the 1st Military District, with a total strength of 7,000 personnel, which was considered a small-scale infantry division. This day, in the early morning, accompanied by the loud military bugles, and Nan soldiers began to get up, wash up, and do drills to the sound of the bugle. After washing up, these Nan soldiers, arranged in dense formations, were undergoing formation training led by their company and platoon leaders. Begin the roll call. 1, 2, 3. Whirring. Amidst the counting, suddenly, an Anan soldier heard a strange noise. A low sonic boom came from the sky, like thunder from a clear sky, the sound reverberating through the entire military camp, unbearable for the ears. These Anan soldiers looked up to see 8 fighters flying in formation at low altitude against the rising sun, entering their field of vision. These 8 fighters naturally belonged to Jekka Group. They had taken off from Chan country, flew over Jinla country's airspace, and arrived in Anan. Since Jinla country had already lost its air force capabilities, they could only watch helplessly as Jekka Group's fighters crossed their territory. Most of the time, they couldn't even detect Jekka Group's fighters. Are those our fighters? Why are they flying so low? Seeing the suddenly appearing fighters, many Anan soldiers were still confused when they saw the 8 fighters separate and open the weapon bays under their fuselages, beginning to drop lethal weapons on the camp. Boom! The 8 fighters began dropping bombs one after another. Strangely, the bombs did not explode on impact, but detonated in mid-air. A bomb weighing 500 kilograms fell among the most densely packed crowd of soldiers, and as it burst open in mid-air, hundreds of 600-gram smaller bombs were released from the main one. Like scattered pollen, they floated down among the formations of the Nan soldiers. Boom! 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 These densely packed small bombs exploded instantly upon hitting the ground, sparks lighting up the area. Steel pellets and metal shrapnel hidden within the bombs scattered in all directions like a heavenly maiden scattering flowers, slicing through and puncturing fragile human bodies. Closest to the explosion, an Anan soldier's pupils dilated, and the upper half of his body was riddled with steel pellets like a hornet's nest. An Anan soldier's neck was sliced open by a shard of metal, his windpipe exposed to the air, emitting a hoarse sound as he desperately tried to cover his neck, but he couldn't breathe at all. An Anan soldier's calf was a bloody mess, as he rolled on the ground clutching his leg, emitting a shrill and miserable scream. The entire encampment seemed to have turned into hell, as 8 fighter jets from the Jekka Group had dropped numerous anti-infantry cluster bombs. A single 500-kilogram cluster bomb had a lethal range of up to 20 to 30,000 square meters. Many Anan soldiers under such carpet bombing were like being baptized by a hail of steel, falling to the ground and dying silently. Even more soldiers were wounded to varying degrees, clutching their profusely bleeding wounds and emitting helpless and agonizing howls. It was only at this moment that these Anan soldiers realized what was happening. The planes above were here to attack, and the neat drill teams instantly turned into chaos. The bombing from Jekka Group's fighter jets continued, constantly dropping cluster bombs onto the ground, pouring down a rain of iron from the sky onto the Nan soldiers. Once all the bombing runs had ended, Jekka Group's fighter jets quickly retreated. The Air Force of Anan was not weak. The Air Force had approximately 35,000 personnel and about 400 various types of aircraft, including advanced fighters such as the Su-30 Mk2, unlike the 2 weaklings Jinla and Lansong. Low-altitude penetration by fighter jets can effectively avoid ground radar scans, but once you've launched an attack, the enemy is bound to become aware. If entangled with Anan's Air Force, the 8 fighter jets would not be able to withstand a siege from Anan's Air Force. As the jets departed with a howling sound, what was left behind was a campsite full of mourning everywhere. All over the camp were soldiers' dismembered limbs and bodies, with blood covering the ground. Because of the dense positioning of the Anan army, at least 2,000 to 3,000 people were killed or injured in this air raid. Facing the air attack from the Jekka Group, Anan was enraged and immediately dispatched its air force in retaliation. Planes took off from airfields within Anan territory, crossing the border into Jinla country's airspace, aiming to carry out air raids on the Jekka Group, even mimicking their low-altitude penetration tactics, using terrain interference and shielding against radar to fly through blind spots, attempting to approach their target undetected and achieve the element of surprise in their attacks. However, the JECA group was well prepared, upgrading civilian planes with biological radars in advance. By equipping these planes with large biological radars and temporarily using them as early warning aircraft, they patrolled inside Jinla territory, carrying out reconnaissance and early warning across the entire airspace. Upon detecting low-altitude penetration by a Nan country's fighter jets, they immediately notified the rear airfields, which then scrambled Lingzhou fighters to meet the enemy. The fighters from both sides engaged in fierce combat above Jinla, and Jinla, like a woman being ravaged by two burly men, could only stand by helplessly as the two countries wreaked havoc in its airspace. January 20th. Siam Bay. Siam Bay is the largest gulf in the Southeast Asia region, bordered by Johor, Lancang, Siam, and Nan, with most waters being 40 to 60 meters deep. It serves as a vital sea route for Siam and Lancang to access the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. The main force of the Siam Navy is stationed here, comprising 3 operational fleets, 1 Navy aviation unit. The major warships include the Chukri Narrabet aircraft carrier, 8 missile frigates, 4 frigates, 5 small frigates, 6 missile attack boats, 77 patrol boats. Following the onset of hostilities with the JECA group, the Siam Navy's main forces have been patrolling the vicinity of Siam Bay. On the 20th, fighter jets from the JECA frontline flew over Siam airspace to the Siam Bay region. Although Chan country does not border Siam Bay, it is only a few dozen kilometers away from the closest point on its territory to Siam Bay. The Siam Navy patrolling here received the news of approaching JECA group fighter jets and was taken by surprise. Realizing the exposure of their location, the fleet commander understood that they were spotted amidst the ship routes and fishing activities. Someone must have discovered their position and leaked it. Upon learning of JECA group's aerial attack, the Siam Navy immediately set up combat formations, all anti-aircraft weapons primed and ready, while notifying domestic fighters for reinforcement. No enemy aircraft in sight yet. Inside the warship's radar room, radar soldiers were tense. Damn it, the enemy must be skimming the sea at low altitude. Immediately inform the homeland's early warning aircraft to share data links. Keep scanning with the radar and find them for me. Wei-sun, the Navy admiral aboard the Chukri Narrabet, said with a tight expression. The Chukri Narrabet, currently the only aircraft carrier of the Siam Navy and the smallest active aircraft carrier in the world, has a full load displacement of about 11,500 tons, an overall length of 182.65 meters, a waterline width of 22.5 meters, and a flight deck width of 30.5 meters. It can carry up to 14 aircraft, but since its AV-8S carrier-based fighter jets have been retired, it is currently used only as a helicopter carrier. Near this aircraft carrier were 4 frigates, 6 small frigates, and 1 20,000-ton class comprehensive supply ship escorting, protecting the Chukri Narrabet in their midst. Several minutes passed when, suddenly, signals of warplanes appeared on the radar screen, no less than a dozen fighter jets, which were now only tens of kilometers away from their outermost escort ship. Launch the missiles immediately, don't let them come any closer, Wei-sun bellowed, giving combat orders to the entire fleet. Upon receiving the combat orders, missiles steadily rose from these escort ships. These sea-based air defense missiles, mostly weighing over a ton and having defensive ranges that could reach hundreds of kilometers, some as high as 300 to 400 kilometers. Meanwhile, on the radar screen, they also simultaneously picked up signals of incoming missiles. Dozens of kilometers passed in an instant in naval combat, especially with the missiles whose breakthrough speed was astonishingly fast. Wei-sun couldn't afford to see if his side had shot down any warplanes. After using their own air defense missiles and close-in weapon systems for interception, still, a number of missiles broke through and struck the warships. Boom! On board a Knox-class frigate, the Siam Navy soldiers held their breath as they watched a missile, several meters long, fall directly into the midsection of the ship. Unsurprisingly, the missile's semi-armor-piercing warhead broke through the hull and penetrated into the interior of the frigate. Time seemed to stand still, and then, after the next breath, the warhead, carrying 165 kilograms of explosives, detonated with a thunderous blast. The entire Knox-class frigate, displacing 3,800 tons, arched upwards in the middle as the high-intensity explosive tore the hull apart. The frigate, twisted by the force of steel, started taking on water and tilting, beginning to slowly sink from the center. The explosion of this warship served as a signal, followed quickly by 3 more missiles breaking through the defenses and striking other escort ships. One of the missiles hit the Chukri Narrabet aircraft carrier, detonating at the stern and damaging the carrier's hangar deck. The propellers were also damaged, and with the rudder out of control, the aircraft carrier began to spin in place, unable to be steered any longer. Meanwhile, tens of kilometers away, Wu Boyan was piloting a spiritual vulture fighter. It was he who had controlled the missile that struck the Siam aircraft carrier. "Hit a big one there. Squadron leader, how about we do a big job? Let's pull together and focus fire to take down this aircraft carrier," said Wu Boyan excitedly, eagerly reporting his success to the whole team. The attacking formation against the Siam Navy comprised 15 fighter jets, all spiritual vulture fighters, signifying the entire air force of Jekka Group had been mobilized. The missiles carried by these spiritual vulture fighters were designed specifically to work with biological radars and to be controlled by genetic warriors, named the Flying Fish anti-ship missile. These missiles had a range of 60 kilometers and were also equipped with biological radars, which could link with the biological radars on the spiritual vulture fighters, thus allowing them to be controlled by genetic warriors. The missiles were capable of subsonic flight at Mach 0.8 and could execute maneuvers like climbing, diving, and turning. The farther away they were, the harder it was to control, and the less agile they became. Anti-ship missiles like these were the heavy weaponry of major nations, rarely sold abroad. Jekka Group could not purchase the anti-ship missile, so they modified it themselves, creating a very basic first-generation product with limited range and power. It couldn't compare with those high supersonic anti-ship missiles with ranges of hundreds of kilometers, but it still had the capability to engage the old-model fighters of Siam. Target, focus fire on the Chukri Narrabet aircraft carrier. The voice of the squadron leader came over the radio. Wu Boyan was overjoyed upon hearing this. He immediately controlled the launch of the last anti-ship missile under the belly of his aircraft through a neural link, simultaneously avoiding the air defense missiles fired by the warships. A friendly aircraft beside him was hit, disintegrating midair. Dozens of anti-ship missiles were fired again, this time aimed at the Chukri Narrabet aircraft carrier. With so many missiles, even though the Siam Navy desperately tried to intercept them, 3 anti-ship missiles still managed to evade the naval air defense network like flying fish, thanks to the agile control of the genetic warriors. They took advantage of the other flying fish missiles drawing fire to avoid incoming missiles and close-range defense artillery, and they successfully breached the defense and struck the Chukri Narrabet aircraft carrier. The Chukri Narrabet aircraft carrier had significantly reduced speed by then and was turning in circles on the spot. Once the missiles had breached the defense, they could not miss their target. One flying fish missile penetrated the engine room of the Chukri Narrabet, destroying all the engines inside. Of the other 2 flying fish missiles, one struck the hull of the Chukri Narrabet, causing a massive influx of water. The other hit the fuel storage, causing aircraft fuel to leak and igniting a ferocious blaze, the black smoke obscuring the sky as if a monster spewing black smoke. The fuel fire spread rapidly, and more than 20 Navy sailors were set aflame, turning into desperately screaming fireballs, chilling to the core. The Siam Navy's damage control was terribly poor. Other sailors were petrified at the sight of their companions' tragic fate and dared not advance. In the end, the flames reached the ammunition depot. The explosion damaged blast doors could not close completely, and fuel flowed in from under the door, ultimately igniting and detonating the entire ammunition depot. With a deafening blast followed by a series of explosions, the entire aircraft carrier was flipped over. This small aircraft carrier, after all, had only a 10,000 tonnage, roughly the same as a large destroyer, and could not compare to the protective capacity of a large aircraft carrier. Now, having sustained 4 flying fish missile hits and causing an ammo depot detonation, it could no longer endure. The hull began to capsize and sink, the bow rising high, like a straight chopstick thrust into Siam Bay, revealing the bottom of the ship encrusted with sea life. Because the water in Siam Bay was not deep enough, The rear half of the aircraft carrier was wedged into the seabed, while the front half still protruded above the surface. The fire still burned on it, cascading flames continuously consuming, like a giant torch on the sea surface, incinerating all the sailors who hadn't managed to escape. Sunk. In the distant sky, the entire Jekka Group Air Force squadron was filled with laughter and satisfaction as they began to return. Behind them, the Siam fleet was either sinking normally or ablaze, serving as a backdrop for the spiritual Vulture fighters. This airstrike resulted in the loss of one Siam Navy aircraft carrier and 2 frigates sunk, with 2 more frigates heavily damaged, reducing a decade of Siam's naval efforts to naught. In just 3 days, the Jekka Group launched more than 500 sorties, conducting large-scale air raids on Siam, Nan, Jinla, and Lansong. The main combatants were still the Jekka Group and the Siam Air Force, with both sides engaging in fierce aerial battles in the sky. Relying on the enhanced combat capabilities of the modified spiritual Vulture fighters, the Jekka Group gained a certain advantage in the aerial fights. Facing the 3rd and 4th generation fighters mainly equipped by Siam, these jets were clearly no match for the spiritual Vulture fighters. Many Siam fighters were beaten out of the sky, exploding into beautiful fireworks on the ground. Only the beautiful country's military sold F-35 5th generation stealth fighters, when matched with the spiritual Vulture fighters, could fight on equal terms depending on the pilot's actions at the time. Since all the pilots of the spiritual Vulture fighters were genetic warriors, the entire aerial battle displayed impressively bright performances, with 3 ace pilots emerging from this combat. Of course, the spiritual Vulture fighters were not without losses, as 5 crashed during the battles. However, the greatest losses for the spiritual Vulture fighters were not in the air but on the ground. Many fighters returning from missions were significantly aged once they were opened up for inspection and maintenance, particularly the parts with enchantment array patterns, which had to be scrapped. But these losses were deemed worthwhile as, through this aerial raid, the Jekka Group destroyed numerous military airports, ammunition depots, military factories, and barracks within the territories of Siam and the Nan 3 countries. In the end, statistics showed that over the course of 3 days of aerial combat and attacks on airports, more than 180 fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters were destroyed, with over 7,000 casualties. Additionally, 3 Siam naval warships sank, including 1 aircraft carrier. This aerial raid shocked the world and brought the Jekka Group's new fighter jets into the spotlight. The appearance of the spiritual Vulture fighter was bizarre, a hybrid of half-biological and half-mechanical design, which led to its nickname, the Magic Bird Fighter. As the war conflict escalated and expanded, the United Nations Security Council began mediating between the combatants, specifically convening a mediation meeting. Because of the significance of this mediation meeting, several countries sent important figures to attend. Whether genuinely wishing for a ceasefire or not, it was still necessary to save face. At the United Nations Security Council meeting, as soon as the meeting began, representatives from Siam and Nan variously spoke out, lamenting the atrocities of the Jekka Group, seeking sympathy and support from the international community. Our Siam aircraft carrier fleet was shamefully ambushed by the Jekka Group. We have always refrained from using naval forces to avoid enlarging the battlefield and increasing animosity between the civilians of both nations. Yet in return for our restraint, the Jekka Group repaid kindness with ingratitude, attacking our warships without declaration of war, causing significant loss to our navy. The Siam ambassador was extremely indignant, painting his military as pure as a white lotus. The participating representatives whispered among themselves. The Siam-based sunken Chakri Narrabet aircraft carrier was the only service carrier to be destroyed in naval combat since World War II. Although the Chakri Narrabet was small and could only be considered a helicopter carrier, it was still an active aircraft carrier, and its sinking in naval warfare had caused a considerable stir internationally. Chan country has long been at war with Siam, so how can there be talk of attacking without declaration? If the opposing side continues to resist stubbornly, the sinking of the Chakri Narrabet will just be the beginning. Representing the Jekka Group, Lu Yingying, who had specially attended the meeting, spoke calmly yet arrogantly, infuriating the Siam representative to the point of outrage. I have something to say. On January 19th at 7:12 a.m., The JECA group carried out an airstrike on our 338th Division using cluster bombs, which are banned by the international community. According to the Convention on Cluster Munitions, using cluster bombs is an act of war against humanity, and the JECA group is a demon entwined in the moral skies of humanity, constantly dragging down our moral standards. The Nan representative stood up agitatedly, pointing at Liu Yingying as he spoke vehemently. In 2010, European countries initiated the Convention on Cluster Munitions, which garnered the support of 103 countries, although most of these 103 countries were incapable of producing cluster bombs. The JECA group's atrocities are increasingly excessive. As we have long claimed, the JECA group is like a tumor hidden within human society, bringing only disaster and death. Now that the JECA group has illegally employed cluster bombs, they are challenging the order of the current international society. We must unite. We can't continue to stand by any longer. The beautiful country's representative was a black woman who immediately offered support to the Nan representative. Two countries that had once fought fiercely were now standing closely together, resulting in a somewhat theatrical atmosphere. In the face of criticism from Nan and the beautiful country, Liu Yingying responded with an indifferent expression. This convention on cluster munitions you speak of, Chan country has never signed, and if I remember correctly, the beautiful country also didn't sign this treaty, did they? If you want us to ban cluster bombs, you beautiful country should first show sincerity by signing the treaty, destroying all existing cluster bombs and production lines under international supervision, and declare an end to any research and production of cluster weapons. Because cluster weapons are too cheap and effective in war, this Convention on Cluster Munitions, like the Nuclear Weapon Ban Treaty and the Anti-Landmine Convention, failed to gain support from major producing and using countries such as Hua country, the beautiful country, and Russia. The major powers simply don't acknowledge it. Upon hearing this, the representative from the beautiful country's expression stiffened, his dark face turning a shade redder, a sign of his embarrassed annoyance, much like someone who had lifted a rock only to drop it on his own foot. After an awkward 7 or 8 seconds, the beautiful country representative turned his head and pointed at the chuckling representative from Russia. If we are to sign this treaty, then Russia must sign it first, then we will follow. The representative from Russia was momentarily stunned, then said angrily, "Very well, play it like that, then. The Great British Empire must sign first. We will consider signing the treaty accordingly." The representative from the Great British Empire immediately shifted the blame, shouting, "Hua country should make a stance first. They should sign it and let us see." The representative from Hua country rolled his eyes and said, "The beautiful country should sign first. If they sign, we will sign." The representatives from the various countries glared at each other, forming a perfect closed loop, causing a burst of laughter from the audience. Thus, the accusation from the representative of Nan was left unresolved, and the international community continued to operate on the principle that might makes right. Disagree? If you disagree, then fight your way back. What can't be obtained on the battlefield can't be obtained through diplomacy either. However, the representative from the beautiful country had a thick skin and quickly recovered, proposing a resolution. Considering the biological mecha, which involves extensive research in genetics and biochemistry to safeguard human peace, I hope all countries will completely prohibit the production and research of such hybrid biomechanical weapons to prevent genetic weapons from becoming increasingly advanced and ultimately leading to the collapse of human society. As soon as this statement was made, the representatives from the other countries knew exactly who it was targeting. After all, only the JECA group currently possessed combat-ready mechas worldwide. The beautiful country statement was as if they were telling the JECA group to back off from researching those weapons which even they feared. This was also a common topic used by the beautiful country to smear the JECA group, just rehashing old arguments. Liu Yingying, with a look of disdain and making no concessions, outspokenly said, "What genetic risks? We haven't seen any. Instead, it's the achievements of genetic research that have contributed to significant progress in the global medical field, like the many products from the JECA group that have benefited all of humanity." The representative from the beautiful country was very unhappy and countered. "In my view, the dangers of genetic weapons are comparable to nuclear weapons. I recently visited Japan and had the opportunity to visit Hiroshima and Nagasaki. the only two places in human history that have been bombed with nuclear weapons. I felt the harm of these massive weapons there, so genetic weapons which could potentially cause a global disaster are like a ticking time bomb. The genetic warriors developed by your Jekka group might go rogue in the future, and if they were to create some contagious genetic virus, that would be unbearable for all of humanity. Lu Yingying's heart skipped, her eyebrows arched, and she sweetly smiled, saying, "Oh, Your Excellency, you just mentioned that you visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan and witnessed the harm caused by nuclear weapons. May I ask if you took the opportunity to learn about local history and find out who dropped those nuclear bombs?" The room fell silent, and the representative from the beautiful country was suddenly dumbfounded. The representative from Japan. With a look of deep resentment towards the representative from the beautiful country, the Japanese representative had words bursting to come out. Lu Yingying then turned to ask the Japanese representative with a smile, "I also want to inquire of Japan, as a representative of your nation, do you know who in the history of mankind committed the only two uses of nuclear weapons in combat?" The Japanese representative awkwardly lowered his head, wishing he could find a crack to crawl into, feeling like he was saddled with an incompetent partner. "Why are both of you silent? I'm not very good at history, so I'm waiting for you two to enlighten me." Lu Yingying chuckled softly, her exquisite and lovely face feigning ignorance, which was absolutely heartrending. As the laughter in the room grew louder, the Japanese representative's expression became even more awkward, utterly embarrassed. Yet he dared not criticize his powerful ally beautiful country and could only suffer in silence. In any case, I believe that the risks of Jekka Group's genetic weapons are immense, and there will definitely be future risks of genetic virus leaks causing severe genetic pollution. So it would be best for the United Nations Security Council to pass a resolution to prohibit all countries from engaging in such genetic weapon research. The representative from the beautiful country didn't respond to Lu Yingying's inquiry, forcibly changing the subject. Lu Yingying pursed her lips and said, "Instead of worrying about genetic pollution, you should regulate real issues like Japan discharging nuclear wastewater into the ocean, which is more likely to contaminate human health and safety. Why don't I see the beautiful country stepping in to stop that? You only ever concoct completely fictitious issues to accuse other nations." With such talks, I could also suppose that one day the beautiful country's nuclear weapons might go out of control, so for caution's sake and for the peace and safety of all humanity, I suggest the beautiful country should first completely destroy all its nuclear weapon stockpiles. But I think you from beautiful country would definitely not do such a thing, since your stirring up these issues is just a way to use the guise of world peace to carry out your questionable maneuvers. The representative from the beautiful country slammed the table, both angry and annoyed. "You talk nonsense, woman. We from beautiful country truly love peace, and all decisions are made with peace in mind." Many in the room displayed looks of disdain. Even a fool wouldn't believe such words. Seeing the topic veering off further, the representative from Hua country cleared his throat and said, "Let's intervene here. The war between Chan country and Siam is not conducive to the peaceful development of humanity. Could we stop this military action? The United Nations Security Council can provide a peaceful solution. To halt the war, the Jekka Group must fully withdraw from Siam and compensate for the losses incurred by this war, including our military expenses, personnel casualties, building damages, civilian deaths, and others, totaling $87.123 billion. The sudden statement from the Siamese representative caught everyone at the venue off guard. Those unaware might think that you are the ones with the upper hand on the battlefield. Such audacity to make such sweeping demands. Even the Hua country representative, who just spoke, showed displeasure in their eyes, knowing such excessive demands would most likely be rejected by the Jekka Group. The Siamese representative, of course, also knew that the demands were too much, as the compensation amount exceeded the military budget of Siam for 10 years. But he was merely following King Pooping's instructions and had no choice but to boldly make this request. Our Nan also demands that the Jekka Group compensate us for our losses, which totals $21.3 billion. Our Jinla airport was bombed, and the Jekka Group must compensate us $9.4 billion as our indemnity. We in Lansong are also victims of this war. The Jekka Group's airstrikes have severely damaged our national interests, and we demand that the Jekka Group compensate us $12.7 billion US. Seeing this, Anan, Jinla, and Lansong could no longer sit still and each brought forth their demands. It's as if they believe that the Jekka Group will actually capitulate and agree to their demands as they wish. Hearing these countries' requests, Lu Yingying's gaze swept coldly across the representatives of the four countries, causing the representatives of Lansong and Jinla to feel especially uneasy. Only the two major Southeast Asian countries, Anan and Siam, dared to meet Lu Yingying's gaze head-on. Very well, I've heard your ceasefire requests, and now I will state our demands. Lu Yingying casually pulled out a map and pointed to areas marked with red circles, saying, "This war was deliberately initiated by Siam, and now Anan, Jinla, and Lansong have also joined the war. In response to this, according to Commander Su's instructions, Siam is required to cede to our country Phuket Island and its subsidiary islands, along with Chumphon Province, Yifengsong Prefecture, Chiang Mai Prefecture, Baby Prefecture, De Prefecture, Chunfeng Prefecture, including areas within the red circles marked on the map. At the same time, Siam, Anan, Jinla, and Lansong must grant our country economic and commodity trade freedoms, allowing our country to freely operate within your territory's industries, such as energy, transportation, communications, finance, and military manufacturing. You are required to implement unilateral most favored nation treatment, offering our country preferential treatment in commerce, navigation, tariffs, and imports and exports. Within the territories of the four countries, our country has extraterritorial jurisdiction, including extraterritorial judicial authority, extraterritorial law enforcement jurisdiction, and the right to conduct transnational law enforcement inspections. Construct a railway arterial that connects the five countries and exempt certain products from taxes. Provide no less than 5 military stations, including a naval base. Compensate our country a total of $641.2 billion US for war damages, to be paid within 20 years, with interest at. Lu Yingying stated many demands, many of which were actually modeled after the beautiful country. For instance, the beautiful country's extraterritorial jurisdiction, investing in and controlling the economic lifelines of other nations, and stationing troops abroad, among others. The most typical of these privileges is the beautiful country soldiers' right to combat in South Korea and the extraterritorial judicial authority in Japan, where even the airspace above the capital Tokyo is managed by the beautiful country, and their own planes can't fly without applying to the beautiful country, a situation that has lasted more than 70 years and continues to this day. The Jekka Group has also learned from the example of Eagle, as they say, question the beautiful country, understand the beautiful country, become the beautiful country. With each demand articulated by Lu Yingying, the representatives of various countries opened their mouths, one by one in astonishment, particularly the representatives from Europe and America, who suddenly felt as though they were transported back to the last century, reminded of the various treaties they forced upon their colonies, treaties that involved ceding territory, paying indemnities, and suffering national humiliation. The representatives from Siam, Anan, Jinla, and Lansong were even more stunned, all of them staring at Lu Yingying with a look of utter disbelief, wondering what this madwoman was talking about and how she dared to make such claims. Bastard! What are you talking about? In such a civilized era, you dare to make such outrageous demands. The Jekka Group is indeed an extremist organization, a Nazi empire. You dream if you think we would cede our land. Who do you think you are? You haven't won this war yet. After coming to their senses, each of the Siamese countries was furious. The demands made by the Jekka Group were much more outrageous than their own. Siam, the most affected, would have to cede over a quarter of its territory if they were to comply with the terms set out by the Jekka Group. The territories I just mentioned have been the inherent lands of Chan country since ancient times. During the era of the Dongshu dynasty, these territories were under Dongshu's rule. Hence, Chan country has always held sovereignty over them, and it's time for them to be returned, Yingying declared righteously, invoking the ancestors of Chan country. The Dongshu dynasty was a powerful feudal dynasty in the history of Chan country, which had launched several eastern campaigns against Siam. At the height of its power, it had annexed and occupied large parts of Southeast Asia, including Jinla, the entire territory of Siam, and nearly half of Lansong's land. It had threatened Nan, almost unifying the Southeast Asia peninsula, with all the Southeast Asian countries cowering under Dongshu's tyranny. Now that Yingying invoked the name of the Dongshu dynasty, the representatives of the Siamese four countries immediately felt humiliated, and their faces turned extremely sour. Nonsense! The Dongshu dynasty is a thing of the past. How can you attribute it to the Jekka group? Have you no shame? The Siam representative stamped his foot, cursing in fury. How long ago it was doesn't matter. The fact is, at some point in history, Chan country did rule over your country. Yingying said scornfully, underlining the old saying that the poor shelve disputes while the rich claim since ancient times. The Jekka group now had the power, and certainly it was time to recall the glory of their ancestors. You assassinate our king and brazenly invade our country, and now you have the audacity to make such an outrageous demand. The whole world is watching. After today, as the news spreads, your Jekka group will surely be scorned by the entire world. A greedy, despicable organization that will only be jointly boycotted by all the nations and peoples of the world. The Siam representative fumed, positioning himself on the moral high ground. Upon hearing this, several representatives nodded slightly, feeling that the Jekka group was indeed going too far. Assassinate your king? Don't pin your dirty laundry on us. Yingying's smile faded, and her expression turned cold. Throwing mud, daring to do but not admit? Those super soldiers who attempted the assassination were trained by your Jekka group, the Siam representative accused. If that's the case, I'd like to ask the representatives of all countries to bear witness together. Let's watch a video, and after that, you'll see who the real culprit is. Yingying said with a cold laugh, pulling out a USB drive from her pocket and handing it over. The faces of representatives from various countries were perplexed, with only the delegate from the beautiful country feeling a bad premonition, yet unable to intervene. As the USB was plugged into the computer and connected to the big screen in the conference room, a series of videos and photos appeared on the screen. I'll provide intelligence on my father, and in return, your CIA must support my ascension. Against the Jekka group? Sure, but I need a full support promise from the beautiful country. Super soldiers? If your CIA has super soldiers, it would be great. Then there is no way the Jekka group can deny the assassination of my father. Our CIA has captured some strengthening pills on the battlefield. Disguising them as ordinary second-class and third-class super soldiers wouldn't be hard. As exchange, allow the beautiful country to set up in our nation's energy and mining industries, but a share of the stock must go to our royal family. One after another, videos and photos revealed the current Siamese King Pupping conferring with members of the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. The disclosure of these secret meeting videos shocked everyone present. Whoosh! A myriad of eyes turned simultaneously towards the Siamese and beautiful country representatives, whose faces broke into a cold sweat immediately. Seeing these videos and photos, the beautiful country representative stood up in a flurry, vehemently denying the videos and photos. Now technology is so advanced, videos can be faked using AI technology, photos can be photoshopped, and voices can be dubbed using voice synthesizers. Everything is fake. Jekka Group is slandering us. Slandering us. The voice of the beautiful country representative was overly loud. Being vociferous does not equate to being right. Psychologically, this reaction tends to indicate guilt. The representatives of the other nations in the United Nations Security Council looked on with odd expressions, well aware of beautiful country's character. They had propped up puppet regimes many times before. What they hadn't expected was that Jekka Group could obtain such confidential intelligence and make it public. Defamation. This is defamation of our king's honor, of our Siam's national reputation. The representative of Siam also loudly objected, observing the video on the big screen. There were no obvious traces of video editing in the speaking and mannerisms of Pupping. Although technology is indeed advanced now, a forged video always has some traces. The videos and photos in front of them seemed to have been shot in real scenes, and the words spoken by Pupping aligned well with his interests. After all, by turning to beautiful country, Pupping could gain the coveted throne. He was the biggest beneficiary of the old king's assassination. But this thought merely fleetingly crossed the mind of the Siam representative, who immediately dismissed it, afraid that thinking further would shatter his internal convictions. No matter whether Pupping did those terrible things in the video or not, he could not admit it now. Otherwise, he didn't know what would happen to Pupping, but his own career would definitely be over. Facing the unyielding denials of beautiful country and Siam, Lu Yingying had anticipated such a reaction. Whether these videos and photos are real or fake, we will upload them to the internet later. The eyes of the public are sharp, and it's such a simple matter to discern truth from fakery, isn't it? Lu Yingying spoke calmly, knowing these videos might not sway the tide of war, but could justify Jekka Group's involvement in it. The representative of beautiful country turned ashen. He was aware that beautiful country did not have a good reputation internationally. Now, with so much compelling evidence thrown out, beautiful country would find it hard to shake off suspicion. Didn't you, Siam, always say you wanted revenge? What you should do most is to depose your king Pupping and send him to the guillotine. That would truly embody your creed of vengeance. Lu Yingying's gaze turned to the Siam representative, her words sharp and mocking, implying that their own king was the biggest traitor who, in pursuit of power, had killed his own emperor father. It's all fake, all fake. This is nothing but bogus propaganda deliberately fabricated by Jekka Group to undermine the morale of our Siam. The representative of Siam stubbornly insisted that the evidence was falsified. No matter what Lu Yingying said, he was set in his belief. Fake can't become real, real can't become fake. Lu Yingying tapped on the map on the table, too lazy to argue a topic that was bound to be fruitless, and spoke again. As for the demands for a ceasefire, you have also heard. Whether to go to war or not is entirely up to you. If you agree to our terms, a ceasefire is not impossible. After all, we do not wish to create excessive slaughter. Such a ceasefire is absolutely impossible. To sign such a humiliating and sovereignty-surrendering treaty, Jekka Group wants to divide up our Siam. Then you'll have to step over our dead bodies. The representative of Siam didn't think twice before refusing. Signing such an unequal treaty would mean standing defenseless before Jekka Group, stark naked, at their mercy. Even if Pupping was indeed a domestic traitor of Siam, that was Siam's internal affair to deal with behind closed doors. There was no reason to allow Jekka Group, an outsider, to meddle, and no justice in yielding to Jekka Group. The representative of Anand slammed the table, firmly saying, "I've seen the insatiable greed of Jekka Group. Our country of Anand's 5 million soldiers, with rifles in hand, will respond to any nation that dares to provoke and insult us." The representative of Jinla stood up and said, "We Jinla are a sovereign nation, not a vassal of Jekka Group. Your ceasefire accord is too shameless and insincere, and we will never sign it." The representative of Lansong also rebutted Lu Yingying's words and said sternly, "The ambitions of Jekka Group will never succeed. Although we, Lansong country, are not powerful, we will not submit to such tyrannical treaties from Jekka Group. Our Siamese 4 countries will unite and resist your aggression until we achieve complete victory." The representatives of the 4 countries unanimously rejected the offer because Jekka Group's ceasefire demands were too outrageous and excessive. If the treaty were signed, Jekka Group's influence would recklessly expand into their countries, and from then on, they would all have to act according to Jekka Group's wishes. Lu Yingying's gaze remained calm as she slowly stood up and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard it yourselves. The Siamese 4 countries have explicitly refused our Jekka Group's peace talks. Since negotiations have failed, then we shall see each other on the battlefield. I offer one piece of advice to the representatives of the 4 countries. Rejecting our offer of peace and squandering this hard-earned opportunity will be the most regrettable decision of your lives. Because in this war you are bound to lose, and when your bargaining chips decrease next time in ceasefire negotiations, our terms will not be so lenient." After finishing, Lu Yingying's gaze coldly swept over the representatives of Siam, Anand, Jinla, and Lansong. If reasoning failed and the opposing side couldn't understand, the Jekka group also knew a thing or two about throwing punches and kicks. If something couldn't be obtained through diplomacy, then they'd take it on the battlefield. Lu Yingying didn't bother with the representatives of the several countries any longer. After she said her final words, she turned and left the mediation meeting. Seeing Lu Yingying depart, the representatives of Siam and the other countries also left their seats in anger. This mediation meeting, which was for peace negotiations, officially declared a breakdown, and war was to ignite once again in Southeast Asia. On that same day, shortly after the meeting concluded, the Jekka group released evidence they possessed showing the Siam king colluding with the beautiful country's CIA in an act of betrayal. As expected, these pieces of evidence caused an uproar on the internet. Since the heated war between Jekka group and the Siamese four countries was already a global focal point, the impact of such significant evidence can only be imagined. Holy shit! So the truth is like this. Quite a drama of fratricide and patricide for power. King Pupping of Siam is a ruthless character. I'm a seasoned programmer, and there are no signs of forgery or manipulation in these videos. Apparently, the evidence Jekka group has presented is genuine. I didn't expect the CIA and the Siam king to be so despicable. It's always the same with the beautiful country. I'm not surprised at all. They never do anything decent. Damn, I was previously calling for a boycott of Jekka group's invasion on the internet, but it turns out I wronged them. It was the Siam king who wanted to collaborate with the beautiful country to plot against Jekka group, who were forced to retaliate. Between countries, what kind of friendship can there be? It's all interests. Look at the ceasefire terms proposed by Jekka group at the United Nations Security Council. Jekka group clearly wants to annex other countries' interests. This war just gave the other side an excuse to intervene, playing on the topic. Those who could see clearly understood what was really going on from the myriad voices on the internet. Although Western media control most of the global public opinion, there was plenty of news they couldn't simply block. Even the Thai people, who control media institutions around the world, couldn't silence the myriad voices of the world. The previously marketed impression of a smart, wealthy, diligent, and commercially savvy nation's reputation collapsed in foreign wars, and its image plummeted across the globe. It was the same with the evidence Jekka group released. Even if Western media wanted to distort the truth, they would find it difficult in the face of ironclad and detailed evidence. In the end, they could only distract the public by shifting the topic and creating other hot issues. Meanwhile, in Siam, a large number of citizens also learned about the evidence released by Jekka group through the internet. In an instant, the recently enthroned King Pupping, who had gone to war with Jekka group to avenge his father, underwent a complete reversal of public image. Many smart people began to rethink and oppose King Pupping's collusion with the beautiful country's CIA, stating it was dragging Siam into hell, and for this, a massive protest erupted. Facing the protests, King Pupping personally stepped forward, claiming the evidence from Jekka group was fabricated, while simultaneously deploying military police to arrest opposing students, workers, and politicians, jailing them. At the same time, he imposed a high-intensity information blockade, banning relevant news on the internet, and declared a curfew in urban areas to cope with the war, prohibiting group demonstrations. With these methods, Pupping barely stabilized the situation. By jailing all dissenters, he effectively silenced the opposition. But Pupping knew this was only a temporary fix. He could only continue to propagate the ceasefire terms proposed by Jekka group at the United Nations Security Council, inciting the public's enmity by denouncing Jekka group's tyranny and power, wildly inciting them to support the war. War has always been the best way to divert domestic conflicts. Pupping needed a victorious war to regain public support. It's no exaggeration to say that this war was crucial for securing his throne. If he could win this battle, he could continue to be king on the strength of his military achievements. If he lost, an angry populace would undoubtedly overthrow him, forcing him to abdicate. January 23rd, in Chumphon Province, before the Karamu defense line. During the 3-day aerial strike, Jekka group dispatched spiritual vulture fighters to engage in battle, shooting down numerous Siam warplanes, and bombarding several airports. Facing such losses, the Siam Air Force began to purposefully retract their planes from airports, relying on ground anti-air defenses for counterattacks. This aerial strike operation gave JECA Group air combat initiative over the Siamese battlefront, clearing the way for ground forces to attack. The Karamu defense line was the key point for JECA Group's ground forces maneuvers. Once it fell, Siam would be bisected by the JECA Group, with a fifth of its coastal territory becoming an unmanageable exclave, succumbing to JECA Group's assault. To defend this strategic location, not only did Siam's 250,000-strong army arrive, but an additional 100,000 troops from the Annan Three Countries Alliance Army rushed to reinforce this position. At this moment, a large army gathered here, under intense atmosphere. Naturally, the 350,000-strong force was not piled up together but dispersed. In modern warfare, traditional strategic fortress groups are rarely constructed, as immobile fortresses are merely targets in front of missiles and aircraft. The attack by the JECA Group on the previous defense line had gone smoothly because the morale of the Siamese army was low and their tactical level was subpar. When faced with an assault from the Sharp Knife Company, comprised of super soldiers, the defense line crumbled with just one stab. But the Karamu defense line was different. This line integrated minefields, trenches, fortifications, and anti-tank ditches organically to form a densely configured three-dimensional defense line. Artillery was interspersed in the middle and airfields in the rear were ready to provide support at any time. This defense setup, constructed under the direction of the beautiful country, had abandoned the old Siamese way of thinking and the outdated tactics of single trench arrangements. The Siamese army held high confidence in this line, dispersing their forces within it and relying on their scattered, penetrating deployment throughout the entire depth of defense. Their aim was to force the JECA Group to continually launch attack formations, thereby slowing their advance, and then to organize mobile troops for a timely counterattack. Within the positions, there were also reinforcements of nearly 100,000 Annan soldiers. These troops recognized as capable fighters by Southeast Asian countries. With the reinforcements from these Annan soldiers, the morale of the Siamese army suddenly soared, believing that even if the JECA Group dispatched the Sharp Knife Company again, they would struggle against such a layered defense line. Do you think the Karamu defense line can withstand the spearhead of the JECA Group? In a military command post, N.I. Mizan, a military observer from the beautiful country, initiated the conversation. Alongside him, there were military observers from the Great British Empire, France, Germany, and Japan, among other Western countries. Dozens of people gathered together. Military observers are a group specifically involved in studying global military tactics and equipment evolution. The battlefield is the place where weapons and tactics evolve the fastest. The war between the JECA Group and the Siamese Four Countries had drawn these Western countries to dispatch observers, hoping to witness this significant battle and the application of new tactics and equipment on the battleground, to enable their own countries to learn and revolutionize their outdated tactical thoughts and equip better, more practical real combat weapons. I think it's not a problem. This defense line has been carefully researched and arranged by us and has also been tested in real combat. Now, Russia and Ukraine are stuck in such defense lines. Lamb, a military observer from the Great British Empire, shook his head with considerable confidence. In his view, modern warfare, where both sides possess intense firepower, no longer accommodates a focus on concentrated breakthroughs, nor the large-scale mechanized group assaults and deep penetration of lightning war tactics seen in World War II. Just like the war between Russia and Ukraine, rarely using large-scale assaults, but instead continually engaging in small-scale probes and attrition. Their defense lines are interlocked like two pieces of sticky candy, battling through infiltration and attrition. The current setup of the defense line, commonly seen in the war zones of Russia and Ukraine, along with the gathering of several hundreds of thousands of troops, significantly increases the density of firepower and the number of soldiers, which to some extent compensates for the tactical inadequacies of the troops. JECA Group has air superiority. Perhaps they will initiate with an airstrike to clear the way. Horacio Gutierrez, a German military observer, speculated while holding binoculars and observing the dense arrangement of bunkers and trenches. Maybe, but the JECA Group's aircraft are limited, and the position is equipped with many sets of anti-aircraft systems. Plus, Most of the soldiers are dispersed. Even if they airstrike, they won't achieve much success. Andrain Cayley, a French military observer, elegantly commented while holding his coffee. That's best. If we could mire the Jekka group in the mud, I could also have something to report back to my country. N.I. Mizan said with a broad smile. The primary purpose behind the beautiful country stirring things up, causing the Siamese 4 countries to engage in battle with the Jekka group, was to deplete the national power of the Jekka group. With prolonged military stalemates and battles, their beautiful country could comfortably sit back and watch the two sides fight to the death, all while profiting from arms sales, which was quite comfortable indeed. The outcome will be revealed soon enough, won't it? As expected, negotiations at the United Nations Security Council have broken down, and within these next few days, the Jekka group will definitely launch their attack. Nakatani Keiji, a Japanese military observer, coughed twice, mentioning this. Although Japan did not send troops to the Karamu defense line, they had 4,000 to 5,000 troops stationed within Siam. However, due to the heavy losses in the civil war in Chan country, they had learned their lesson and were no longer recklessly sending troops. Yes, we will soon know the result. Perhaps the Jekka group will deploy their spider mecha. We should observe carefully. N.I. Mizan's tone was excited, and so were the other military observers. What they were most looking forward to was Jekka Group's spider mecha. They needed more detailed information about these mechas to provide references for their own military mecha development. Meanwhile, across the Karamu defense line, a long train whistle echoed. One train after another arrived, continuously slowing and braking. On the platform, Russia's military observer Vargas Low and Hua country's military observer Song Ziming also came here to wait, curious to watch the train slowly entering the platform. As countries on good terms with the Jekka group, after obtaining Jekka group's consent, they also sent their military observers, wanting to learn how Jekka group would respond to this war. These Japanese prisoners are really efficient workers. The railway sleepers are well laid. No wonder my predecessors made these guys plant potatoes in Siberia. They are indeed capable. Vargas rubbed his hands, his eyes glancing sideways at a construction site where thousands of Japanese prisoners were diligently digging fortifications. The soldiers supervising them held whips in one hand and firearms in the other, ready to lash anyone who dared to slack off. They were Japanese soldiers captured by the Jekka group during Chan country's last civil war, numbering over 10,000. Because the Japanese government couldn't afford the ransom, they were continuously detained by the Jekka group to be used as labor. This time at the Karamu defense line, a large number of Japanese soldiers were also brought over to construct the temporary railway and fortifications. The hardest and most exhausting tasks were assigned to them. There were numerous cases of death from exhaustion and illness. This is what they deserve. Song Ziming glanced at those Japanese prisoners. Although it didn't comply with the Geneva Convention's treatment of prisoners of war, being in another country, Song Ziming wouldn't meddle, and he even enjoyed it, though he couldn't show it too obviously due to his status. Old Song, do you think Jekka Group can quickly break through the Karamu defense line? Vargas asked while waiting for the train to arrive. It's hard to say. You should have a deep understanding. That kind of interlocking three-dimensional defense line is very tricky. Siam is well prepared on this defense line. It depends on how Jekka Group is going to deal with it, said Song Ziming, who came here for this purpose. It's not easy to break through this defense line. If Jekka Group can take it down within 10 days, that means they're successful. Otherwise, if it turns into a war of attrition, subsequent reinforcements from the Siamese 4 countries will continuously arrive. Even if they are just cannon fodder troops, it would turn this attack-defense battle into a drawn-out war. Vargas shook his head, his tone somewhat worried. They often encountered such situations in their war with Ukraine. It wasn't that they couldn't use a large volume of artillery and fighters to bombard the area for 10 days to half a month, using superior firepower to destroy the defenses, and then sending ground troops and drones to clean up the remnants. But the effect was not significant, and their advantage was not that great. Domestic ammunition production couldn't keep up with consumption, and they were far from affluent. Jekka Group was in the same boat, having just integrated domestic industry. The procurement of foreign armament was limited, making it difficult to meet the needs of a war of 1 million, not likely to drown the enemy in bombs as the beautiful country would unscrupulously do. The train has arrived, said to have new equipment. Let's take a good look and chat later. Song Zimming patted Vargas's shoulder, his eyes keenly watching the halted train. Vargas looked over as well, where the tarp on the train was pulled back, revealing the fierce war contraption within. Click! About the open tarpaulin, an array of Cold War machines came to life. 8 long legs stretched out and stepped down effortlessly from the train, their upper bodies dotted with gun barrels, with more than a dozen guns, as well as a cannon that was 10.5 meters long and had an impressive caliber of 203 millimeters. One by one, the Spider main battle mecha disembarked from the train, a perfect fusion of metal and biology, standing 12 meters tall. Vargas and Song Zimming felt a shadow loom over them, needing to tilt their heads back to take in the full view. The innate fear of humans toward colossal creations made them instantly understand why the Spider main battle mecha garnered such imposing renown, hailed as the revolution of modern heavy carriers, replacing tanks as the new kings of ground warfare. The Spider main battle mecha. This little beauty is just too beautiful. Look at those bristling gun systems and the icy, thick armor. It's simply an incredible killing machine. Vargas was enraptured, looking at the Spider main battle mecha with more warmth than he would for a beauty, and almost lost himself to the urge to touch its metal long legs, regardless of his status. You call this a little beauty? Song Zimming's mouth twitched, as to him, comparing the Spider main battle mecha to humans was like comparing the white-browed spider to ants. Humans seemed especially tiny and fragile in front of it, and without even using weapons, its combat full weight of hundreds of tons could crush a human into a meat mush with one stomp. Isn't it so? Such a war machine. So perfect, so beautiful, so majestic, Vargas declared with utmost certainty, causing Song Zimming to shake his head and chuckle. Then Vargas really did touch it. Unable to control himself, he laid a hand on one of the Spider main battle mecha's metal long legs. Fantastic! This is the mecha we want. Vargas gave a thumbs up, full of admiration. At the same time, the Spider mecha lifted its foot, and the hatch opened, as a figure poked out. It was Hao Guyu from the 1st Mecha Combat Brigade, calling out to Vargas. Hey Mousy, be careful not to get stepped on. Hao Guyu piloted his own A180 mecha, now looking like it was brand new, its interior meat tumor having restored itself after replenishment with spiritual liquid. Due to standardized modular design of the external armor like fitting tiles, replacing it was also very convenient. All that was needed was to remove the damaged armor plates, and then place the new armor plates onto the Spider mecha with a crane. The meat tumor inside the mecha would automatically retract and excrete a special adhesive fluid to fit the armor plate into place, relying on the meat tumor's properties to fill gaps without the need for any welding or riveting, thus attaining formidable sturdiness. Therefore, after a brief rest and targeted modifications in the rear, Hao Guyu returned to the front line once again. Brother, your mecha is too pretty. How about I treat you to a drink? I'll bring out my cherished fine liquor, and you let me pilot your mecha. How about that? Vargas was very forward, speaking fluent Chan country language and keen to pilot a mecha right upon meeting. Song Zimming felt a touch embarrassed, but that's just how straightforward the Mousy are. You? Ordinary people like you couldn't handle such a big mecha. Even just walking would be hard. Don't judge by my looks. I was also a gaming ace when I was young. I can operate multiple lines too. Don't believe me? Let's bet. We'll drink. If I drink you under the table, you let me pilot the mecha. Deal? Drunk me, haha. Amusing. Come find me after this war is over. If you win, I'll let you pilot it. Hao Guyu couldn't help but grin, agreeing without hesitation. A genetic warrior afraid of competing in drinking? Ridiculous, there's no way he could lose. Colonel Vargas, Colonel Song. Captain Hao Guang from the 1st Mechanical Combat Brigade came over upon hearing the commotion. Captain Hao, I just made a bet with your subordinate. If I win our drinking contest, I get to pilot a mecha. You'd better bear witness to this. Vargas was excited, clamoring as soon as he arrived. Hao Guang glanced at his son, then smiled and said, "No problem. Mr. Vargas is our honored guest. The friendship between Chan Country and Bear Country is long and profound. If you want to pilot the spider mecha, we will accommodate you later." However, Hao Guang inwardly sighed, considering the mousy tradition, hoping the other wouldn't get drunk on 2 bottles of vodka, then attempt to drunkenly operate the mecha. Ahem! This mecha! Song Zimming let out a couple of coughs, seeming to hold something back. As a military observer, he was also extremely fond of various new equipment. If he could take the Spider main battle mecha for a spin, his trip would not have been in vain. "Colonel Song, you can also try if you're interested," Hao Guang said invitingly, knowing the Spider main battle mecha wouldn't reveal any secrets. The neural link control used alone was enough to drive the world's researchers to tear their hair out. "Then I appreciate it," Song Zimming said gratefully, his eyes lighting up with excitement. As they chatted, more and more trains slowed to a stop, and a steady stream of Spider main battle mecha continued to disembark. "There are too many of them. This is more than just one mechanical combat brigade, and those are—" Song Zimming snapped back to reality, suddenly spotting the issue. The number of Spider main battle mecha disembarking from the train had already reached 300 and was still increasing. Moreover, Song Zimming noticed differences in some of the later arriving Spider main battle mecha. Although they also had 8 metallic long legs, their upper bodies were completely different.